podcast. I'm here with my good friend Angela. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. This is a freezing cold studio like we just discussed. There's no heat, so if you see us shivering and or covering ourselves in a blanket, that's why. So first things first, tell me about you. Tell me about what you do, what brought you here today, how we met, from your recollection.
Yeah. Oh man, I hate that question though. It's like at an interview, like, tell me about yourself.
You're like, I forgot who I am and what makes me a person.
For sure. At one point, I was like, I really like cats.
Do you? Is that true, or are you lying?
Well, prior to children, the responsibility seemed fun.
Yeah.
So I'm Angela. We met, was it 2 summers ago?
Yeah.
Down at the lake. So my husband's uncle has a really nice house with a great dock, and we went down there. Just a little family affair.
Hoping for a quiet weekend, I'm sure.
Yeah. Walked into like, what, 5 of you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little girl's weekend.
Yeah. Someone's like birthday or something.
Yep.
And I don't think we initially spoke, but I think we were trying to keep to ourselves on the side. And you guys were obviously having a much better time than what we were having.
I think we're like, do you guys want a drink? Do you want something? And you're like, no, I'm good.
Yeah. But all I really remember that is you and Luna, which is my daughter, immediately bonding and connecting and doing backflips off of the dock.
How old was she at that time?
8.
Yeah, that's
And you
where I am mentally.
You had some I think it was like a cheap little ring that you were wearing, so your real ring wouldn't go into the lake. And she held on to that for like a year. Was just like wearing it.
Yeah, I was like, take it.
Yeah,
it's what's mine is yours. I get really giving whenever I drink anything. So I'm like, do you want me to write you into my will? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if I had actually put Luna into like all of my belongings will go to her one day, just out of that one lake excursion.
No, it was great.
It was super fun.
I didn't have the energy to be flopping around on the lily pad.
Oh, I always do. Yeah.
You guys were going crazy. So that was our first interaction. But really, I think at some point we would have met eventually just because we have several mutual friends.
Yeah, which I didn't realize until after the fact. And my sister-in-law had gotten headshots from you, and they were amazing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
she's sister-in-law.
Brooke.
Oh, Brooke.
Yeah. And she's like, oh, yeah, I know her. And I was like, well, why don't you mention that?
Oh, yeah, because we were on the Sea-Doo. She's trying to yell this conversation. Yes. And I'm like, what?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Communication was a little askew that day, but we do have a lot of connections, and we've got to chit-chat. I stay in your DMs. I always have something to say to your videos. I think you're amazing and fabulous and hilarious and super fit. So all that to give you all the kudos, but I want to get into this whole deep conversation as to why you're here specifically, but we're going to start off a little bit lighter. So we're going to do what's called a report. It's what you're reading, eating, playing, obsessing, recommending, and treating. So tell us what you're reading or what you have read if you're a reader.
Yes, I actually took a picture of it because I didn't know if I was going to be a part of this reading segment or not.
Yeah.
But I'm in the middle of 4 books because I'm terrible at finishing a book. One's called The Women.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't remember the name of the author. Apparently she's all the rave. Mm-hmm. It's a very depressing book about a nurse in Vietnam.
Ooh.
But I don't know. It's good, I guess.
Good
it's
for
historical
the
fiction.
mental, yeah.
Yeah.
You have to challenge your brain sometimes too.
Well, and I can get through more nonfiction easier than fiction. And then my mom gave me a book early after kind of discussing what we're going to go over today. It's wintering. I cannot remember.
Yeah. We can link them too. You can tell me afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really helpful. Maybe that's only 2. I'm actually.
Are you a big nonfiction girl then?
Yeah, but I just don't read anymore.
Yeah.
My brain, I can't, I fall asleep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
6 pages in.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, that's good to know. Historical fiction is great. I like it sometimes, but I have found myself wanting more inconsequential, fluffy romance books lately, just to the Hallmark movie equivalent of a book. That's what I have been reading. So it's been very mind-numbing in the best way. What are you eating? Favorite foods? Craving, fixation?
I literally wanted to stop at a gas station on the way here and get Nerds clusters.
Oh, a woman after my own heart.
Love candy
right
now.
Yes.
Before being pregnant was I'll eat all the chips. And now I think my biggest dream that I will force myself not to live out is to go get an entire box of warm Krispy Kreme donuts and eat them all.
Oh my gosh, yes.
In one setting.
Are you on that side of TikTok or anything where you see people doing those big?
I don't have TikTok.
Okay, well,
that's probably
probably a good thing. But they have people all over that will do that as a challenge, that and crumble cookies, and I keep seeing them and I'm like, I could do that.
I forgot we have a crumble cookie.
I know.
Aren't they 1,000 calories a cookie?
Yes. Yeah. It's astounding. It really is. But the temptation is there to go and get the whole box of the donuts and then just,
Well,
I
because
know they would
they're
go
like
away so
cotton
easy.
candy. There's,
Yes, they just melt.
Yeah.
I saw someone they were trying to do like a winter bulk and get as many calories as they could, and they squished 12 donuts down into like the size of a burger and ate them. It was insane. And now I've been thinking about that ever since I watched the video. And I'm not doing a bulk, so
Sounds fantastic.
I don't need to know about that. Okay, what are you playing? Is there like a song, a podcast, a show?
No, I'm pretty boring when it comes to that. Just
I like that you're media averse. I feel like it's healthy mentally. I have too many things for each of the categories, so it's good that you don't have like so many fixations.
Yeah, are you gonna answer these?
No. Next time. I talk about all my fixations too often. I need to find some new ones so there's like variety. Are you obsessing over anything?
No, not really.
That's good.
Yeah.
So you're very well adjusted. It sounds like you don't depend on pop culture to fill the void.
Oh yeah, definitely not a pop culture girly.
It's just everything for me, I think, but that's okay. Like I said, neither here nor there. What are you recommending and what are you treating yourself to?
One, warmth.
Yes,
It's so cold in here.
Very relevant at the moment.
Recommending. Well, I mean, it's what we're here for today, but I think just vulnerability and asking for help when you need it. And
Absolutely.
I don't know. I'm about to have my second kiddo 10 years apart. So I feel like in a lot of ways, relearning all of the things. I feel like it's like my first kid all over again.
Let's start to unpack that. So first and foremost, tell us about your story with Luna in however much detail you would like to, but tell us
Yeah, I'll say, where do I begin?
How is your life situation? What's going through your mind when you found out? Was she planned? Was she not? Let's just talk about anything you want to share.
Okay. Yeah. So trying to think of where to start. So Luna is my daughter who's 9. She'll be 10 in April.
And she's the most beautiful little girl I've ever seen. She looks exactly like you.
I know. I hope this next one looks also like me too,
Yeah.
but we'll see. So I found out I was pregnant with her. That would have been in 2014. I was 21 years old. I won't say that it was planned, but it probably was not prevented. And I guess when I found out, I was also in the midst of, I was traveling like every summer. I know before we got started today, I was telling you how I lived in Hawaii.
Yeah.
The summer before I got pregnant with her, I'd spent a summer in Italy. Any of my friends would have told you at that time, like, Angela's probably never going to get married and never going to have kids. It just wasn't my interest.
What was your relationship to the idea of motherhood? Did you see yourself as maternal? Did you want kids in your personal view of your life?
So after I had a pretty rough upbringing and encountered and walked through a lot of abuse and neglect. And so I think a couple different things arose of that. One, I don't feel like I really got to start like living and like have this childlike experience or mentality until I was like 18 or 19.
Wow.
So I did not want to, like, I that was the first time I got to be a kid. So like that wasn't on my plate.
Which is interesting because I think with trauma, you see both sides of that, where you see someone who hasn't had stability and hasn't had structure or safety in their own childhood. So they almost grow up and long to create that for themselves. So you settle down very, very early, or you are the opposite and you know, trying to recreate that childhood that you never got with that freedom in your own adulthood. So it's interesting that there's two very starkly different paths.
Yeah. Well, and actually even I guess a third path was I was so terrified to ever repeat any of the things that had happened to me. I was like, no, like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to not do that, just because so often we are a product of like how we're raised or our environment. And I was like, I don't know. So yeah, that was, I didn't really sit around dreaming of motherhood or any of that, but
which in itself is a taboo topic. I think, I don't know if did you grow up around here in Missouri? So
where everyone's a mom at like 22.
Yes. And it seems like everyone aspires to be a mom, which is something that I always felt very out of place in discussing, because growing up, you know, people, that's just what you do. And especially growing up in a Christian household and growing up in the church, then there's so much almost like longing for motherhood and girlhood from the start all the way into being a grown up. So I always felt a little bit out of the loop with all of that, because even though I would picture my life and I want to get married and I want to have kids, but I didn't want to babysit. I wasn't very maternal. I wasn't like, let me hold the baby. I just didn't feel that connection. So I was like, something must be wrong. I don't have that gene. I don't have that trait. So don't think I'll be a good mom. So I always felt a little bit just disconnected with my like femininity in a way because I didn't share the same desire to grow up and have kids that was so all encompassing. And I was a little bit envious of my friends who felt so assured in that and the fulfillment that they seemed like they would get from having a family. And I was like, I don't know that that will fulfill me the same. And that's changed as I've gotten older, but I still don't feel the same way. Like I don't babysit. I don't want to hold kids necessarily. I don't really I think I will like mine one day, but I don't like seek them out unless it's 8-year-olds at a dock that we can play mermaids with. But you know,
Yeah, and a couple vodka waters
yeah,
later.
yeah, exactly. For me, not for the 8-year-old. But yeah, that's something that I relate to in that regard. But I didn't have the trauma necessarily to inform that part of my personality.
Well, and I think that's a hard conversation to have because of specific to where we are and how young people start to have families. I think it's easy to be titled almost selfish for not like
Yes.
wanting that. I know
Mhm.
when I lived in Seattle for a bit, it was so refreshing to see people who were not actively pursuing dating relationships and until their 30s and then having kids well into their 30s. I was like,
Mhm.
finally, a society
Yeah,
that
no
gets it.
pressure. Yeah.
Like people want to actually follow their career and not to say that those can't be dreams. Sometimes those are dreams for people, but yeah, for myself, I never was just
Mhm.
like I am going to just be a mother.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it was not my
Mhm.
goal or my dream. I was like, I want to work 80 hours a week at a
Yeah.
corporate, like I really did. I wanted to like work
Absolutely.
and make money and travel.
Mhm.
So,
And then you find out you're pregnant. So what is
yeah.
that like for you?
Um, I don't really, okay. So again, it was 10 years ago. So there's like a lot of like parts that I don't remember
Or repressed, maybe.
or yeah, repressed. I know that there was definitely shock. And so prior to this, I'd spent a summer in Italy, and her dad and I had gotten engaged in March. And so there was a bunch of red flags in that relationship. But one of the more prevalent ones or the more observable ones was when I was in Italy, despite this having had like already been a set in stone plan, there was like a lot of opposition and comments
Mhm.
about how I'm not home to like plan the wedding and all of this stuff.
Mm.
So I cut that trip short by like a month. And instead of
Mm.
flying home, I flew on a suitcase directly to Seattle.
Wow.
That was like the beginning of July. And I'm pretty sure, I want to say it was like beginning or mid August is when I found out I was pregnant. So naturally, I freaked out.
Right, right.
And I called my mom. I was like, I'm moving back home.
Mhm.
So I think I stayed up there for like another month, moved back home, and then he joined me like a month later. But yeah, it was terrifying. And I think it was just I'm supposed to be planning a wedding. And there goes like my summer vacations that
Mhm.
I was traveling all over the world and
Mhm.
any sense of like independence. And I'm 21. Like
Right.
all of my like friends are
Having hot girl
raging in a
summers. Yeah,
basement
before it was.
somewhere and like I'm pregnant
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
So, yeah, it was very isolating
Right.
to be pregnant at that age.
How did you navigate all those emotions? Did you have excitement initially? Was it something that you came around to? Did you consider any other option for yourself? Like, what was that process like for you?
I do remember shortly before taking a test after, this is like weird to talk about, but after a particular incident where,
Mhm.
again, not preventing, we went to Planned Parenthood and I kind of sat there and I was like, nah, I'm good. I don't need to go
Mhm.
get Plan B. And then, of course, was pregnant. And
Mhm.
again, it's a season I've like tried to go back and think about because of the particular season that I'm in right now. I've had a lot of people ask me, like, did I deal with depression in my pregnancy with Luna? And I don't really recall a lot of it, but I also do have very specific memories of coming home and just like laying in my bed and
Mhm.
like being so distraught. But
Yeah.
then, like, I don't remember like when that ended or how long that lasted or like
Mhm.
uh, synopsis of my whole pregnancy isn't like you were depressed. I
Right.
just was again,
Yeah.
time and stuff has happened in between then. So I don't know. I just kind of did what that had to be done,
Yeah.
got a job and
Mhm. And grew up
grew
more.
up. Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like becoming a young mom? Were you a single mom immediately? How did that process kind of happen? And what was that like transitioning from a 21-year-old with, you know, the wedding planning responsibility is your main thing. Now you're raising a child. You're forced to become this very, very grown up version of yourself at a young age. What was that like?
Um, so I guess taking a couple steps back, I think it's important to note that um, I think, yeah, I wasn't technically a single mom from the beginning, but some of those characteristics started just in the simple fact her dad could not ever stay employed. So here I am working as a PCA at Mercy Hospital, which I don't know if
It's
you
a
how many,
difficult
it's
job.
like
Yeah.
12 hours and
Oh
like
yeah. It's
I would
very
track like
manual.
13 miles.
Yeah. Very, very physically demanding job.
Yeah. So I'm working all the way up until 5 days before I have her. He is just
Wow.
in and out of jobs. We're not even like in our own place at that point. I think we had eventually moved to his mom's house. So there's just a lot of pride,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
that. Um, and then I just totally spaced on like the actual question. You
Pregnancy
just
brain.
asked
There
me.
you
Yeah,
go.
I'm telling you, it exists.
No, but just what was that like? So did you struggle with having her and then postpartum depression? Was that a factor for you at all? And then how was your transition to actually becoming a mom with your daughter here?
So at least as it pertains to postpartum, I don't think I don't know. I can't really say if I had it, if I didn't. I just do remember this one day a few months after she was born. It felt like, and the only way I know how to word it is like this cloud lifted.
Mm.
I wasn't sitting around like sulking or hating my life or whatever it was. I had had a couple concerning thoughts that
Mm-hmm.
had come into play at that point. But then this cloud lifted, and it was at that point where I knew the life I'd been living was like not necessarily normal.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think at that age I really knew how to look at my emotions and know like this is what you're feeling and this
Right.
is what this is. I
Right.
just kind of knew after the fact, like that didn't feel right, but
Mm-hmm.
that's over
Yeah, maybe this is just my new normal, and then it
and went about.
clears,
Yeah.
and then you're suddenly contrasting then with now. You're like, that wasn't actually how I was supposed to be feeling, and I'm glad the rest of my life won't feel that way.
Yeah.
Did you, with being so young, did you struggle with the same thoughts that you mentioned earlier on becoming a mom and not wanting to repeat certain cycles or not wanting to bring certain things into your daughter's life? How did you differentiate the kind of mom that you want to be from what you were afraid you might be?
I mean, I feel like it's said over and over again, there's no manual on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most comical thing is all of the things people say that they will do or that they won't do, and then they become a parent, and
Mm-hmm.
you're just kind of in survival mode. I mean, it wasn't so relevant when she was young. I think the only thing that I knew for me moving forward, for example, was no spanking,
Mm-hmm.
any sort of, and I still feel this way if I were to ever at any point let out a physical response out of frustration, the like, not, I don't know, this is like a weird way to put it, but I feel like inside of me, I easily house like a dormant, this is gonna sound so dark, like a
No.
dormant like monster, because
Mm-hmm.
that's like what I was shown.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really have to be particular about the things that I do or say, or like, especially when it comes to punishment or
Right.
consequence, what I allow, or even, people that like I've dated in the
Mm-hmm.
time that have been around Luna, or like meeting Sam, like very early conversation. I will never be a spanking household.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do this
Absolutely.
either, or like it's extremely triggering.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess as it pertains to that, then yeah, I mean, I took those sort of precautions to not repeat things. But I mean, every day in motherhood, there's something that's like triggering, but it's been very opposite of what I thought. Like, obviously I can avoid certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, so for example, a friend and I were just talking about this, where like your kid can eat Thanksgiving meal and then they go to like a birthday party and there's like chips and cake, and they will act as if they've never eaten
Yeah.
for like a
Right.
year, which is like normal kid behavior. But for
Right.
me, that's super triggering growing up in a
Mm-hmm.
household where punishment was in the form of like withholding food.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or when she goes out of the house like looking like crazy,
Mm-hmm.
or forgetting her shoes or something. It puts me back in these places where like, well, I didn't have shoes,
Yeah.
so like, why are you forgetting your,
Yeah.
so it's
Almost
just
like the comfort, in some weird way, the comfort that you've worked so hard to give her because she deserves
yes.
it is almost inciting this resentment that you were never given that, because now you know what a mother is supposed to do, and not, I don't know where the trauma came from in your household, but you know what a parent is supposed to do. and the lengths they're supposed to go to provide that comfort and that safety where, you can leave the house without shoes and not be afraid, and you can take for granted things like that, which is a huge accomplishment, by the way, as a mom, that she can have that comfort and that
Yeah.
feeling of freedom. But you weren't given that. In some way you fell through the cracks and didn't have a safe household. So now that you know what it takes to provide that and you've done the work, I'm sure there's a little bit of envy, even of your child, as crazy as that sounds, because her life is better than yours was. So I'm sure it's a
100%.
difficult thing to wrestle with.
Yeah, and it is super difficult to understand sometimes the frustration she has on things because it's, I feel like we've all referenced or heard this referenced, when we were children ourselves and we didn't want to eat and we heard about the starving kids in Africa.
Yes.
And it's like
Yes.
we're always taking this extreme thing.
Yeah.
And I've talked in therapy a lot about this, just like her sense of like gratitude on things and sitting there and trying to rationalize what is normal for her, like what's age appropriate.
Right.
But also she has no context or didn't have to go through the things that I went through. So how is she possibly supposed to like sit there and be like, oh yeah, this is why I should feel or think this way.
It's like she deserves to be sheltered, and you want her to feel sheltered in the sense that you weren't, but you want them to have that sense of appreciation of everything that they do have, because how else do you appreciate it?
Yeah. So it's weird. Again, I mean, I directly take precautions not to repeat certain behaviors. But I think more of the struggle is watching her go through all of the things, basic needs, or even some of the extra stuff that I wish that I would have had. And it's just like, oh, well, this is such an expectation. And I'm like, no, like cherish this.
This is a blessing. Yeah, absolutely.
But I can't like rationalize that with her all the time.
Do you think in conjunction with those difficult feelings, there's some kind of healing that comes for you, and being able to not repeat the past and being able to know that you are stronger than, what you thought that you would be able to do? And every day you're keeping that, like you said, the so-called monster, you're keeping that down, and you're proving to be better than whether it was your expectation or your past or all of those things. You've superseded what you thought was possible. Is that healing for you at all?
I mean, 100%. I think when you look at kids that come from my background, like statistically speaking, and truth be told, my biological brother and sister are statistically living this out. I should be on drugs, unemployed, not have a bachelor's degree. I mean, it's just like the odds are truly so against me. So there is a huge sense of pride that kind of propels me forward. And I feel like I've always told people and if there's a third type I haven't discovered, but there's genuinely two types of people in the world. It's the people that take things that beat them down and learn from them and rise up out of it, or you victimize yourself and you're stuck in that. And, and I think we can have moments where we do both, but every time that I definitely defy against like what I was shown. I mean, that is like the innate natural behavior in me, is to repeat those sometimes not so great things that I witnessed as a child. So it's a huge sense of pride. I was just thinking about that the other day. Like I was like, dang, I've gone 9 years, almost 10 years, and I've never once had to spank my child. And like, she's still obedient and like a great kid.
That's one thing I do want to know, is that I only know your life from the outside, from what you put online and from what I know about you as being your friend. But Luna is so smart. She's respectful. She's well-spoken. She's obviously a fun, lively kid. She seems happy. She seems carefree. She just seems fulfilled. And she seems like she has her Maslow's hierarchy of needs is fully met. So she's so great. And to have the ability that she had, even at 8 years old, to talk to adults, and you can just tell that there's so much love that's been poured into her. And you're well-adjusted, you're well-spoken, you're charismatic. So there's so much that would not point to the trauma that you've had in your life. And I think that you should be so proud of what you've accomplished to get to this point, because if I didn't know about your background, I would have never guessed it had any kind of abuse, any kind of trauma, just because of the way that you carry yourself as a grown-up and the happy relationship that you have now and just everything you've built for yourself. I think that you should be so proud of that, because it didn't happen overnight, obviously.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a great thing. But I also want to counter that just a hair with sometimes, and this is where once we get into like the season of this pregnancy, that, and I'm not saying your mentality, but because I look so normal, or because I carry myself a certain way and I didn't just adhere to the ways that I should have been, or responded in ways that truly probably could have felt right in the moment, but
Mm-hmm.
not been very healthy. I think a lot of times people then negate to like understand where,
Like it must not have been that bad if you turned out okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well,
No,
like
it was
I
that
can
bad.
look one way, but it doesn't mean like
Exactly.
internally I'm like still processing
Oh my
that.
gosh.
Or like I've definitely had several failing mom moments.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think one thing for me is I might not spank, but one thing I really struggle with in parenting is like I'm a yeller.
Mm-hmm.
So like
Yeah.
it's just a different way of like outsourcing this like pent up either emotions due to the circumstance or just things that I'm actively trying to fight against.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, I'm a perfect parent because I don't spank.
Well, I
Yeah,
don't think
well, I'm like screaming at her
no.
from across the house, like, get your shoes.
No, I
Like,
don't think a perfect parent exists, but I think that as long as your child is loved and taken care of, that's as close to perfect as you can
yeah,
really get. There's a million ways to love your child, and I think that Luna's obviously a very beloved little girl. But I think that what you said before, that sometimes whenever you carry something so well, people forget that it's still very heavy. So you can have all this baggage and all this trauma, but just because you carry it and you've overcome it, it doesn't mean that it wasn't still an awful thing that was done to you. And that's something that I've talked about a lot on this podcast with my circumstances and those of others. Just whenever you choose to kind of let go of this chip on your shoulder or this burden, it almost feels wrong because it feels like I'm saying it wasn't bad. And I feel like if I
yeah,
let go of this and choose to heal and or pursue healing even because it's an ongoing journey, then it's almost like admitting that what has happened to me or what was done to me or what I'm going through isn't that bad because I'm going to choose not to stay in that season of being so upset and so distraught, even if you're actively going through it and you know it's because you deserve happiness. It's not because that transgression or that season wasn't awful. It just means that you deserve to be happy now.
mm-hmm.
And it sometimes can feel like you're letting go of something that you almost want to hold on to it to be like, no, I was wronged. I didn't deserve this.
Oh, 100%.
But I think letting go of it is the only thing that anyone can do for their own healing and their own eventual happiness. It just still feels a little bit.
I know.
It
It's
feels
hard to
wrong.
remember it's like an act for yourself because it so often feels like, well, the other person just wins or
Yeah.
this situation wins.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, that person, if they were able to do whatever to you, they're probably not caring about however you're feeling right
Exactly.
now. So it's
Exactly.
like something that you're carrying with you and
Exactly.
holding yourself back.
And even in a circumstance when there's not really a person to point at to be angry at, you're just kind of mad at the universe as a whole, then it seems like you're almost brushing your own baggage aside and saying it's not that important if I can move on from it. But I think that you can be very wronged and you can be very upset and have gone through a lot, but you can also be working towards happiness, and it doesn't take away the fact that you still came through a very difficult thing. And that's something that I always have to remind myself, even whenever you're talking about your situation, whatever it happens to be with someone, and they tend to always look on the sunny side. It's a pet peeve of mine that I wish I didn't have, when people almost make light of everything. Well, at least this, well, at least
Buddy the
that.
Elf.
And exactly. And there's nothing inherently wrong with being an optimist and being positive and trying to find those things. But it feels like even though that's true, even though this is true at the same time as this, and even though there is a sunny side or a silver lining that you can always find, then it feels like whenever you immediately go to that, then you're almost dismissing the dark side of it. So I don't know. I feel like I'm more of a, now that I've had some more struggles in my adult life, then I'm more of a agreeing that that sucks versus, well, at least, because
Yeah.
I think whenever I'm venting to someone or I'm speaking to someone about things that are hurtful to me, then I don't want to hear, well, at least this,
Oh
you
my
want to
God,
hear
it's
just
so invalidating.
exactly.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, let's get into the rest of this. I do want to touch on your relationship to fitness and how that has helped you. How it's helped you heal, how it's helped you, mentally, because I think that probably plays a big role in where you're at right now in this current season. So,
100%. It is I pay for a therapist and then I pay for my gym, which is
right.
my other therapist.
How did you get
and
into?
It's much more effective, I think.
Yes, yeah, I would concur with you on that one. How did you get into fitness? Have you always been into CrossFit? Was it something you've started?
No,
Different journeys?
I my first team experience ever, I was a sophomore in high school and I joined the soccer team and I was absolutely awful.
Right.
But I could run really fast,
Mhm.
which is only so helpful until you reach the ball. And the way soccer and cross country lined up, I always had the cross country coach coming to me and saying, Angela, like you should really run because it'd condition you and,
Right.
you'd stay in shape for soccer. And I think my junior year I signed up and then I chickened out. And I had also the coach was like the geology teacher. And I was like, I cannot be in that class after
Of course.
like dropping out. So I left his class And then finally my senior year, I was like, that's it, I'm doing it. And it's funny because a couple years after I graduated, I sent him a letter and was like, thank you for introducing me to like the best thing ever, which was
Oh,
running. So I did that for several years. I even ran a little bit with Luna. Definitely was not as active with Luna as I am in this pregnancy. And then I don't know, took a few years off. And then after quarantine, I don't know, a lot of people either went
yes.
downhill or uphill.
Yes.
I turned into a workout fanatic
Right,
during COVID. So I got back into running and I was like, okay, I need something else. And for me, CrossFit was just the only other thing that could give me like the same high.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so bad at it. Like I had never touched a barbell. I could not do weights.
Right.
Like I was cardio queen, but I was not strength queen. And so, yeah, just, I've been doing that the last 4 years and it's, I love it so
Mm-hmm.
much. And it's definitely there. I have this long reel that I have been working on since, the day I found out, and I probably go and watch it. Not like I'm like super into myself, but I just like how proud I
Yeah,
am.
yeah, yeah.
But like I go watch it probably like once a day.
I love that.
Just because I am so proud of like what my body can do in pregnancy. And it's still awesome to like show up at my gym. I'm sure this is about to really decline now that I'm almost 30 weeks, but like
Mm-hmm.
still kicking like
Yeah.
everyone's butt. And I'm like, I'm pregnant.
Yeah. And they're probably like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I just think back to the first trimester where I was struggling immensely with depression and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. And there were so many days that the only hour of the day I got out of bed was to go to the gym. And I often wonder like how much worse it could have been if I didn't at least push myself
Yes, yeah.
to go do that.
And if you didn't already have this established as an outlet in a sort like a sanctuary almost in your life, what would you have turned to when you encountered this difficult season?
Well, and exactly, especially too in pregnancy, you know, like I can't like go out and like have a glass of wine to like
Right.
cool off. I also like quit vaping whenever
Mm-hmm.
I found I was pregnant. So like all of my unhealthy
Like vices.
vices were gone.
Yeah.
And then yeah, so I was really glad that I had built that up and I
Of
had
course.
that to go off of. So
Let's go back to this pregnancy. So fast forward, obviously you're happily married. You're in a beautiful relationship. You guys look so cute together. You're amazing. So that is different this time around. You have a healthy, stable
100%.
relationship. You're obviously very in love. He's great with Luna from what I can tell. And you find out you're pregnant. What's different this time? What's going through your head? Was this a surprise? If you feel like sharing that, you know, what was this like for you?
No, and I think it entails taking a couple steps back because we kind of touched on like single motherhood and like my
Mhm.
experience with Luna, but and I don't know like what's all necessary to go into detail or not with,
Whatever's
but
relevant to you.
you know, so at 21 I became pregnant and I, you know, was like, oh my gosh, and at that time I didn't want to be pregnant, but
Mhm.
obviously moved forward. And I think a lot of, I guess I'm just going to give this backstory to explain why I felt the way I felt whenever I found out I was
Yeah.
pregnant. So a lot of my loneliness began with the financial, what's the word I'm looking
Like the
for?
burden, the responsibility.
Yeah, just like responsibility and like not having that shared with someone. When I go into labor, as I'm like in triage, I'm sitting there. I had read in this book because, mind you, I thought I was going to do an all natural delivery that I
Wow,
did not
brave.
really include Luna's dad on or do
Mm.
any preparation for. Like I
Mhm.
was like, I can do this, you
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
know.
Sometimes ignorance is bliss, honestly.
Yeah. So I go in and I had read this one part of a book and it was like, there's like pain receptors in the bottom of your heel. And if you hit that and you count out loud through each contraction, it'll help you get through it.
Mhm.
And that did help. And I remember her dad being like, hey, can you like quiet it down? Like you're going to like wake everyone up. And weirdly enough, it blows my mind after everything I've been through. And maybe it is just like a trauma response. When I'm in a high stress situation or traumatic situation, I become
Mhm.
very submissive, like
Mhm.
oddly enough.
Yeah.
Any other thing in life, I like pop off.
Right,
And I'm
right.
like, yeah. But I was like, okay. And like looking back, I'm like, we were in L&D.
Yeah, it's meant for noise, I would say. If there's ever a place to scream.
Yeah. So then I make it back to the room and I'm sitting there and I just resort to what I did when I had really bad period cramps. So I'm like rocking in a circle with my
Mm-hmm.
pillow. And I'm like drenched head to toe in sweat. I can just
Mm-hmm.
remember how like was like literally wet.
Mm.
And I started to just like moan with the pain. Also, just to give some context, we're in a little triage room. I'm in my bed. There's 2 chairs, and he's in like the furthest chair next to
Ah,
the door.
yes.
So
No reason to hold your hand or
yeah,
anything.
like it's
It's not a
fine.
life
I've
altering
got
moment or
this.
something. Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there like looks like I just took a shower and
Mm.
like whatever. And he was like, "Can you like stop making those noises, or people like might think something different is happening back here?" Seriously, I just need to like rehash some of these moments.
Mm.
So there was
So
that.
you're invalidated. You're not being comforted. You feel alone. You're coming
Yeah,
off of,
and
you
that
had just been
was
working up until 5 days prior to this.
yes. And I'm 21 and never even wanted this in the first
Yes.
place. And
Yes.
I'm like excited, but I'm also like
And you haven't gotten to
horrified.
nest, it sounds like, because you weren't in somewhere that you wanted to stay long term. So you have
No.
no stability right now.
Then I have her and I take the 12 weeks. Woo, 12 weeks unpaid FMLA.
Yay.
Also, he's unemployed, classic,
Mm-hmm.
throughout all of this. And I go back, and I think it was my second day back to work. And I have this patient, the wife was in the bed and her husband was at bedside. And at some point I made the comment, I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm so tired. I have a newborn at home and she's still waking up like 3 to 4 times in the night." And I'll never forget, this was like the highlight or like the beginning of, I don't know, there's just like an epiphany in this moment. The
Mm-hmm.
husband looks at me super excited, like, "Oh my gosh, that's exciting." He goes, "What's your guys' schedule like?" And proceeds to say like how they broke up their
Mm-hmm.
schedules. And it was like at that point, I was like, Dad's help? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I would wake up in the middle of the night, and this happened. She finally slept through the night about 9 months. But when I'd asked for help in the middle of the night, I was cussed out and then told in the morning, like, "Oh, I have no recollection of that. I was sleeping."
Mm.
So I did everything on this journey that I like never thought I would be doing at that age, completely alone.
But almost
Um,
more difficult than being alone because you were being berated and you had like an energy
yeah.
energy leech in addition to doing all the work by yourself. It almost would have been easier if you were by yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it did get easier because then shortly after that, oh, mind you, I think we touched base on this a little bit. But I grew up very, very religious.
Mm-hmm.
So when I found out I was pregnant, there was a ton of shame around having a child out of wedlock.
Right. Right.
So we actually eloped when I was 37 weeks.
Mm.
So that was super fun at a chapel down in Branson,
Oh,
Missouri.
yay. Every girl's dream.
Yeah. Just because there was like so much, I don't know if it was pride, if it was shame, it was fear, it's probably just all of it. But I was like, he has to be my, if it'll just sound so much better if I say this is my husband,
Mm-hmm.
like 21. I mean, unfortunately, people are having babies at like 16,
Right.
17. Like, it's not like we were that young, but we were still pretty young.
And I'm sure at that point you're longing for anything stable, like just structure of some sort.
Yeah.
Like,
So it was, yeah, just all chaotic. And then shortly after, I think when she was around a year and a half, I had actually taken a trip to visit some friends over in France. And I was just kind of like, I can't do this alone. When I get back, you'll
mm-hmm.
be out.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of then started the fun process of getting a divorce at
Mm-hmm.
22, like
Mm-hmm.
not something I thought that I'd be encountering.
Right.
So yeah, there's just a lot that goes into my journey that I probably still haven't even touched base on. That this experience, for one, that I know I've said this a lot, but like that I didn't plan on having, then I have this experience and it's going like completely chaotic and it's
Mm-hmm.
like less than ideal.
Right.
So, and then that and just a bunch more life that happened in my 20s. I remember when Sam and I got together 2 months, probably about 2 months into dating, I was like, "So here's the deal. I know a family's really important to you, and I'm starting to really like you. But if you want to move forward, like, you need to know or plan that I will never have kids again." Like,
Mm-hmm.
my experience of motherhood, I just, and I'm still working through this to so much,
Mm-hmm.
but I was bitter, I was angry, and I was resentful. Like, I felt like everything was just stolen from me. There
Yeah.
was not a part where I could look at it and be like, what a blessing. Like,
Right.
I hear
Well,
some people
yeah.
talk about motherhood. I'm like, cool.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad
Like,
that was your
that's
experience.
not how I felt in it at all.
But it sounds like you had it was kind of something that happened to you. It wasn't something that you got to choose. It was in every regard, it was something that you had to endure, and
Yeah.
you didn't have that season of cherish it while they're young, and this is such a
No,
good
seriously,
stage.
it was like survive.
Yeah, everything was something, it was to endure and to just get through the day. And again, it was something that it wasn't your timing, it wasn't your circumstance in any sense of the word. So it's, I think, perfectly natural to feel like it was stolen from you, because that's not what you chose for yourself. That wasn't the life that you chose. And if you would have one day come to your own conclusion that you were ready for a family, it wouldn't have looked how it did in actuality. So you're
Yeah.
right to feel like you were robbed.
Yeah. Well, and I rationally knew, and the experience could have been different and better with a different and better person and environment.
Mm-hmm.
But I had also spent 10 years, or well, not 10, but 7 to 8 years hustling and living in like the cheapest house I could find, and barely being able to afford. I mean, I couldn't even put her into a sport until like 2 years ago. I just hated it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I never, ever want to repeat this. And I remember seriously being like 39 years old. She's going to be 18. Like, I'm going to be in my glory days, as everyone has like 7-year-olds.
Right.
And I was like, I'll get to live
Like,
again.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will be tired that day.
Yeah. So yeah, told Sam that. And I remember I of course texted him this, because that's what we do in our generation,
Right.
and couldn't bear to face him face to face with that conversation. I just remember coming back to the car, because I'd of course thrown my phone and didn't want to see his response.
Of course.
And
Convinced that everything is over.
yeah, I was like, that's it. And I come back and he's just like, I really like you and want to see where this is going. And I like you more than basically like what that outcome could look like. So I was like, okay, cool.
Wow.
And then we get engaged, and it's like everybody is always one season ahead outside of your lifestyle. It's like you're dating. When are you going to get married?
Yes.
Then like you get engaged. You're like, here I am, guys. They're like, are you going to have children? And it's like always the next step. And I think people are on autopilot and don't realize they're doing it, but it's so annoying. So that was like the question: are you going to have kids? Are you going to have kids? And seriously, I'm sure
I have one and she's perfect. What else is
yeah,
there?
well, that, and plus I don't know how many people I just looked dead in the eyes and was like, hell no. Like, I'm not doing this again. Well, over time, some things changed. One, I watched my best friend, who I work out with. She got pregnant and was a beast. And so some of the fear was, oh my gosh, I've worked so hard to be in the shape that I'm in, and I don't want to just lose that. So that was proven that like I could still,
of course,
work out. And she's like I mean, gosh, she just won a competition not too long ago and like smoked everyone 10 months postpartum.
That's
so I was
amazing.
like, okay, that fears, there's that. And there was someone who asked me in response to engagement, are you gonna have kids? And I gave her the whole very vicious, absolutely not. And she just kind of looks at me and she goes, I love, and said her husband's name. Whoops. I love him so much. I just wanted more of him in the world. And I was like, oh my God.
That gave me goosebumps.
I know. I was like, I never thought about it like that. And Sam was, oh my gosh. We were just at a wedding a couple months ago, and the pastor specifically was like, someone by their heart when kids gravitate towards them. Every kid at this wedding was like, I mean, they didn't know him at all, and just like flocking towards him. He just has that like he's so good with kids. So I think my heart began to soften. But then I also felt like I was on this timeline of like, I'm 31. So if I'm going to do something, I got to do it now.
Right.
So yeah, I went and had my IUD taken out, and very, very, also in that time bought a house and had only been married for like 5 months.
So yeah, just a couple changes. It's okay.
Yeah. So lots of things that we just decided to throw into our first year of marriage. So yes, it wasn't a surprise. It was planned, but I had an IUD in for 10 years and people are like, it can take a year.
Oh yeah. So the timing was probably
not me.
Yeah. A lot more sudden than you expected.
Yeah. So that happened super fast. And then it just led into the season that I had, which was this summer. And it was just like I had thought about this relentlessly and I thought I was so prepared. But then when the actual positive line came across, I think I just was immediately thrown into this space where I had to come face to face with all the angerness and the bitterness that I was holding on
Yeah.
to. And then every single fear that I had, I almost just was like, yep, that's going to happen to me. And if like Sam and I would get into a dispute, I was like, okay, rent, I think for a 3-bedroom apartment is this
Yeah.
much. And I'm going to raise
Like
the
fight or
kids
flight
like here.
immediately.
Like, you know, that was just like, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's the
Like just
only
the
experience I
PTSD.
have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
And I'm sure everything familiar, like if you had any similar symptoms from the first pregnancy to the second one, I'm sure every single thing reverted you back to that
oh,
mentality in that
100%.
stage of your life
Yeah.
and awakened things that you thought that you had buried.
Yeah. Well, yeah, buried literally
Mm-hmm.
is what happened. That and I think it's talked about, but like we'll never understand it or be able to be like this percentage comes from hormones, but like
Mm-hmm.
you're like crazy for like the first like 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then also for fun, in the first 12 weeks, you can't tell anyone about it. So it's
Yeah.
like you're so alone
Mm-hmm.
and
No one knows why you're feeling crazy.
yeah, no, yeah. So anyways, I don't even know if that just answered
No,
the
it did.
question you
It did.
asked.
So you obviously, this is something that you and Sam wanted, and then you find out, and then everything started. Did you have a little bit of happiness at the beginning, or was it kind of an instant trigger for you?
Well, the day I found out, I took a test for funsies and then
Mm-hmm.
was like, "Oh my god!" When I saw the line,
Mm-hmm.
and 2 hours later, his whole dad's side of the family was in our house, and we had a whole lake weekend planned.
Right.
So I really didn't get to process anything.
Yeah.
I just kind of had to be like face to face
Mm-hmm.
with his family, and then spend a whole weekend like not even in
Trying
the
to say
comfort.
anything.
In
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm like filling up like my whatever cans with water,
Yeah.
pretending I'm like still drinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I didn't really get to process. And I don't know. I feel like it was like almost immediately after it was just like brick wall.
Yeah.
And I was just down for the count until about
Mhm.
15 weeks.
Yeah. And what
So,
was that like? The reason that we had even talked about doing this podcast episode is because you made a really vulnerable post just sharing, your experience. And I think that it was admirable because it is kind of taboo to talk about pregnancy as if it's anything besides just,
yeah.
a gift to you. So I think it was very brave because there's so many women who have struggled with either incredibly difficult pregnancies or traumatic relationships prior to their pregnancy or just any number of hurtful, difficult circumstances surrounding that. So the fact that it's not something that's easily talked about is very sad. And that's why I wanted to have you on so badly because obviously I've shared my journey, which is the opposite side of everything. And I don't want anyone who listens to feel alienated from even that regard because I think that there's just this picture perfect pregnancy that everyone kind of talks about and posts about and sees. And on either side, whether it's difficult pregnancies or unfavorable circumstance or lack of pregnancy and fertility struggles, those are all kind of ambiguous and there's not really a conversation about that. So what led you to finally being able to make that post and what healing has kind of have you undergone?
Yeah. So I think the number one thing to note is that anything pertaining to conception, pregnancy, postpartum, and then the duration of parenting is the most picked apart, opinionated conversation on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll never escape it and you'll never be doing anything perfectly right.
Right.
So that makes it completely challenging, regardless of whatever side you're on in the first place.
Of course.
And so, yeah, when I found out and I went through, I just kind of like shut down again. Like I had mentioned, I'd have my hour in the gym and then I was basically laying in bed crying and hopeless. And I think when I first went into it, I was like, this is amazing that I'm going to do this 10 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I would look at people who have like 3 kids under the age of 4 and I'm like, you're psychotic.
Mm-hmm.
But then like the reality happened and I was like, wait a second. My daughter brings me coffee in bed and stays in her room till 8 a.m. and I'm
Mm-hmm.
about to have a screaming newborn up
Mm-hmm.
4 times a night.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I think just coming to terms with like, I was so close to, well, and I was really like, she's at a more independent age and I had a partner helping me for
Yes.
once.
Yeah.
I had like
You finally got to
seen
an
the
easy
light.
part. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was like, what did we do?
Mm-hmm.
Was just like, and we did it too, like, oh, it wasn't this perfect timeline or we
Yeah.
did it too fast or like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, just hormones and fatigue and all that stuff. And honestly, to be completely transparent, it's been the same as it was with Luna. Like, yeah, I was really tired. I had some food aversions, but like overall, I've had a pregnancy people would dream to have.
Right.
And so therefore, again, another isolating factor. Can't talk about it. Can't complain about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know what happened. I do think a big shift in hormones regulated is the
Right.
biggest thing. I went and started therapy at 11 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I kind of had one last, like, final breakdown at 15 weeks where I called a friend and I just was so open and transparent about the way I had been feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
she created a safe place for me to say some things
Mm-hmm.
that probably would just mortify other people. But in
Mm-hmm.
allowing me to be like unhinged and unfiltered
Yeah.
after I had that conversation, I then kind of was like reprocessing it. And I was like, I don't actually feel that
Yeah.
way. And but it like,
You have
because
to
I was
let
allowed
like
to
the
be
dark
safe
twisty
in it.
sides out. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like,
And almost like see those dark thoughts through to like
yeah.
see them out. Like what does that mean? What is this part of me? Where is it coming from? And then decide if that's in actuality how you feel or if it's just a dark thought.
Yeah. So I think that and the hormones and all of that was a huge just release.
Mm-hmm.
And initially we at the beginning I told all of our parents, I was like, we are not going to share this on
Right.
social media. I am not I know myself too well, and I know if I post it, you know, we'll get however many hundreds of likes of people being like, this is amazing. And I'm going to be like, oh my God, I know. And then 2 days later, I'm going to be still crying
Yeah.
in my bedroom. So I
Yeah.
was like, why would I do
It'll feel
that to myself?
inauthentic and almost the excitement of other people will invalidate the struggles that you've
Yeah.
had internally that you may or may not share.
So then we did decide, because I got Sam Rams tickets for his birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, while we're in LA, we'll go out to Joshua Tree and like we'll do our
Yeah.
little announcement. Well, then I did the announcement. And for the longest time, this reel I mentioned earlier of like snippets of me working out all throughout
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy, I was going to share it in that.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just like something tugging on my heart. First of all, I'd started having more vulnerable conversations. I went from people asking me how I was doing and me
Mm-hmm.
saying like, oh my gosh, great,
Yeah.
to often I would just say, I'm struggling, is what
Mm-hmm.
I'd say. And then having conversations, every person I've talked to that has been pregnant and had wonderful, awesome, healthy pregnancies, have great kids, every single one of them said, me too, Angela. That's exactly how I felt. I
Mm-hmm.
was so scared, or there were moments that like I didn't want it,
Right.
and I was like, oh, I'm not alone. Because prior to that, I was getting validation from Reddit threads.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Like,
With faceless individuals like
yeah,
strangers.
I was like, you know, I just like felt so alone and like
Mm-hmm.
feeling crazy. And then as I posted online, and obviously I'm sitting with someone who's struggled in this year as well, I have had so many friends and acquaintances in the 30 weeks that I've been pregnant literally lose their babies.
Yeah.
And so it just, I don't know, it's so complicated and weird. And I think once you have these conversations, even with women that are on the other side, they still totally understand
Yeah.
it. But like I don't know if it's like the internet or social media or like
Mm-hmm.
what, but like everyone else casts this like
Mm-hmm.
war between the two
Yes.
opposing sides,
Well,
and you
it
can't
almost is
talk
like
about it.
it's as though like, well, you don't have the right to be sad because at least you can be pregnant, and that completely invalidates this array of feelings that are so complicated and so nuanced. And even like you said, these perfect healthy pregnancies that say they happen in a happy healthy marriage where everyone has the perfect amount of money saved up and you have the house and you have
Yeah.
plenty of room and your in-laws are close and they're willing to help babysit. Even when everything's quote unquote perfect, pregnancy is hard and motherhood is hard. So even with all favorable circumstances, which I'm sure some people are fortunate enough to get to have, rarely, then it's still a really, really difficult season of life and transformation. And you're not the same following becoming a mom as you are prior to even deciding to try. And I think to create this black and white, being pregnant is always a blessing, which I do believe it's a blessing. And I think that it can be simultaneously a blessing and also bring a whole slew of complications and problems at the same time. Just like you can be simultaneously grateful to be pregnant, but also exhausted, confused, frustrated, sad, isolated, all of these things at the same time. And that's a huge reason that I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I know that you aren't afraid to shy away from, you're not afraid to have these difficult conversations. And I know that I've been guilty of that in my own struggle and feeling bitter towards anyone who can get pregnant. And then just thinking, if I could just get there, I would be so happy. I would never complain. You rationalize it. But I also know that's hypocritical of me, considering I am currently in so many situations and other aspects of my life. If I could just get here in my career, if I could just get here with a good man that I could marry, if I could just get here financially. And then here I am making more bargains, with
Yeah.
God and the universe and everything else. So I think that there's never a point that you get to that you stop taking things for granted. And that's why I was like, I need to open myself up to hear the other side and to hear, there's never just a getting pregnant fixes all your problems. There's never like once
No.
you get to this point, because for me it's become such an idol, like this thing that I've been wanting for so long, and this thing that I have, it's like continually become more complicated that
Which only further idolizes it.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Then I'm like, I know on the realistic side of my brain, that's only the beginning of a whole other hard season of life. So to put it on such a pedestal and to think like once that day comes, like everything will be so great, it's unrealistic, and it's setting myself up for this future depression when you finally get what you want, what you've been coveting for so long, only to find out like, well, now I can't sleep, now I have this, now I have that, now I have that. So
Or that
that's
you can't ever complain ever again because you finally
yes.
got, yeah.
Yeah, and when you get something you've wanted for so long only to find out that it's not perfect, that it's actually really difficult too. So I just think it's such an important thing to like to hear your story, which represents so many women of what they've gone through and are currently going through or will go through, and just to know like as women, everyone is struggling in
Oh,
this stage of
100%.
life.
Yeah. And I definitely had people reach out to me and was just like, thank you so much. This is so validating. Or someone reached out and was like, I'm like 7 weeks right now. And, I've got this coming up and this coming up and this coming up. And it's just not working out in my
Mm-hmm.
life. Thank you for sharing this. And I think Instagram's the only social media I have, but I can sit there and make my life seem beautiful,
Yeah.
but I'm a big empath and I love connecting with people. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think I even in my caption was like, I'm going to want to crawl in a hole after
Yeah.
this, but
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
I think it was so important that you said that, and even for today's day and age, it's not talked about enough. So I can't even imagine the isolation that you felt during your first pregnancy in a time where social media wasn't to the point where it is now, where people are more willing to have very personal conversations online. So today, if we feel this uncomfortable, putting ourselves out there and having these conversations about miscarriage or infertility or even resentment towards a pregnancy, then how much worse must you have felt back then? So I think hopefully there's some catharsis and some healing for you in being able to talk about that and not face judgment and to face camaraderie, even people thanking you
Yeah.
for feeling that way openly.
Well, and there'll still be people that don't understand, but
Right.
I can say the most hurtful thing said to me so far in this pregnancy came from me sharing an ultrasound with a family member who very much knew I was struggling with depression and anxiety. And their response was, so are you happy now? Like, are you happy yet? And
Mm.
naturally I was like, yeah, like I feel great.
Yeah.
And then followed up with, there are so many women out there that would love to be in your shoes. And I was like, okay, well,
Nothing like guilt just to compound
yeah, I was
everything.
like, I'm aware that is
Mm-hmm.
like honestly one of the many things perpetuating the shame that I'm feeling that makes
Mm-hmm.
me then want to be silent and not say anything. But like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
fully aware that there are people out there that
And
would love that.
it's almost treated as though you don't want to be happy. Like, well, why are you choosing to feel this way? And you're like, I would give anything to
Oh
feel
my
happy.
gosh.
I
Yeah,
would
I felt
love to
insane.
like to cherish this moment. Like I would love to get to almost like tape over that past experience with something happy, and to be treated as though it's your choice, that you're just, oh,
Yeah,
I feel like being unhappy right now. I feel like being depressed. That's just so
that's so
sad.
fun.
No,
I love that.
I think it's incredibly real to have something that you had planned for and that you had wanted and that you had decided was good, only to then find out, I'm not processing this like I had hoped or had wanted to or expected, and then decide, did I make the wrong choice? And obviously, I believe there's a day in the future that Luna and new baby will be grown up and graduated, and you'll be like, this makes perfect sense. This is exactly how my life was supposed to go. But there's a lot of time that will exist between that moment and right now, and a
Yeah.
lot of versions of you that are going to exist, and versions of Sam and versions of Luna and of your family, whatever size it grows to be. So I think anything
Too.
that, let's be clear, but you know what I mean. I think it's so what's the word I'm looking for? Reductive to say,
Yeah.
well, this is what women want. This is what you should want. Are you good now? Are you happy? So I don't even know how I would respond to that situation.
Yeah. No, and I genuinely have found joy now and I'm looking forward to it. I think one of the biggest things is spiritually, I felt like God put over my heart, this is going to be a healing process. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I heard those words kind of spoken over my life, I was like,
Wow.
this is going to be beautiful and amazing.
Yeah.
And then I think, and I think back to this conversation and it's so absurd, but I literally remember looking at Sam one time in the eyes and I was like, this is from the devil. This is not from
Yes, it
God.
is.
I was like, those
Oh
were
my gosh.
lies.
No, it's
And I was
crazy.
like, but now I can see some of the fruition of that. And honestly, it took, I right now I'm calling it like the darkest summer of my life because it was so lonely.
Mhm.
But it took that to get to a place where I came to terms with like I hadn't healed and I needed to get past things
Mhm.
and still will be doing that for a long time because I carry a lot of anger and motherhood
Yeah.
just from those early years. And also just accepting, you said something earlier, but like
I feel like
about the chip on your shoulder, it's like there was a part of me didn't want to let go. I wanted to be so
yes.
mad at Luna's dad for
Mhm.
just all of these things that he has done and still actively does. And I
Mhm.
I couldn't ever coming to terms with the fact that Sam was like completely opposite and this was going to be a magical great experience. Plus, also, side note, there was guilt that maybe this kid would have like a better, more beautiful life than
Yeah.
Luna did and
Mhm.
I never wanted what I
Yeah.
had for her to be that. So there was just like fear of this kid being like,
Mhm.
the golden child.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot going
There's
into
so
it.
yeah, so many nuances there. I think it's also what you said about at the end not wanting your second baby to have this perfect beautiful life that you couldn't give to Luna, but I think that just in looking at her from a third party, I know I'm not in your household every night, but she's so loved. Like you can tell you did such a good job with her, and I think you should never question what you were able to accomplish, and I think it's even more admirable that you were able to pour so much of yourself when you didn't have that much to give. So now, hopefully, as you continue to feel more excited for this pregnancy and this baby, you can feel like you're overflowing with just love to give to your family and blah blah blah. But the fact that whenever you were depleted and didn't have someone pouring into you and taking care of you, you were still able to provide that for your daughter. Damn, like that's insane, and that's an incredible feat of motherhood that I think it puts to shame what we talked about at the very beginning, that maternal instinct, that desire to have kids. Like the fact that when the rubber met the road and you had a choice and you could choose to repeat history, to not go through with the pregnancy, you could choose to give her up for adoption, all these things, you chose to show up for her every single day, and now she's a beautiful, well-adjusted, happy 10-year-old. Like you did that, and now you have help. But I think that you should never doubt what you're able to bring to your children's lives. And maybe now you have a house and maybe now you can afford youth sports and different things, but the love is the same.
Yeah. No,
I'm
I
gonna cry
agree.
giving you a compliment. But you were talking about something else too. I don't want to derail my own train of thought, but I think that somewhere in my trauma of the past year, the chip on the shoulder has been, it's been like a, I have it, then I don't, then I have it, then I don't, then I have it, then I don't. And I go through this constant cycle of like spiritual awakening and healing and catharsis. And I feel like I'm in a good place and I'm letting go of this. And then something happens and I immediately like revert right back to feeling bitter and angry at the world. And I think in my most recent prayer time and like speaking to God and all these things, the main thing that I have grappled with over the past year consistently has been it's not fair. Like it's not fair that we're ready and that we have the preparation and that we're praying for this and we don't get this prayer answered, and then some people who don't want to be pregnant are, and people who are not planning and who are not excited about this and don't want this and aren't ready. Why are babies being handed out like candy on Halloween to them? And then
Yeah.
people, like I know so many women who are struggling with infertility in my own life and then through this network of people that I met through the podcast. So that's one thing I've been really trying to pursue, in my faith journey, is just being okay, not understanding why. And I still don't really have an answer, but it's just something it's made easier talking to other people who, and this sounds bad, who are struggling with the opposite side, because then I understand, the grass isn't always greener. This resentment is not king. It's not like it's this voice in your head that's telling you like, well, you've been wronged. Like you deserve to be more angry than anybody else.
Yeah.
So hearing another story, like I can't even tell you, I read your post and I was in the backseat of my mother's car antique shopping with my mom and my grandma. And I read it and I was like, I need to take a minute because this is so humbling for me, who's made myself the center of,
Don't make me cry now.
but it's true, just the center of my own story, and thinking, my pain is paramount. And it's becoming the only thing that I can see. And to hear you being so open about yours, it was like, I need to humble myself and get another perspective and understand it's all hard and it's all a very, very difficult experience that we're all grappling with. So thank you for sharing that from me personally.
Well, and what a mature, not to sound like your mother, a mature way of thinking about that. I think we often are fighting to find people who can rally up with us, and there is so much validation in knowing that someone's been through something similar. But yeah, when you come together, I mean, you learn so much from the opposite side. And I, as I was preparing for this, and I even literally did it in the time that we've spoken, was I felt the need to tell every detail as to why I was allowed to be angry and
Yeah, to
sad.
prove it.
But who cares? I could have had a beautiful first experience with Luna, and I
Hmm.
could be, a millionaire. I don't know. I could have
Exactly.
all of these things, and I
Yes.
still could have felt depression and
Yes.
anxiety.
Yes. Like, why do we feel like we have
Um,
to qualify our pain with
yeah,
life circumstances that made it bad? Why can't you just have a hard time and that be enough to
yeah,
have a hard time? I think that's probably just womanhood that we always feel like we need to justify why we're upset or why we're sad, or you get, dubbed as crazy. But I think that's also a good point that I'm glad that you made, because if there's someone who's listening that has the perfect situation and is still struggling, then I'm sure they feel isolated in their own right too. So
yeah,
it's such a crazy cycle of, you know, someone like that feels like they can't feel bad because look at your first pregnancy and what you didn't have. And then, you know, someone in your situation for the first pregnancy might think they can't feel bad because look at someone who can't get pregnant and have kids. And it's just a continual cycle of everyone
well, it's
feeling,
like gaslighting yourself.
yes,
Like I've always said, my one of my many little mottos is if the worst pain you know in life is a paper cut, then like that's relative to you. And
yes,
I mean, I
wow,
have a horrific childhood past, but then I'll hear someone who like maybe experienced it a little bit better, and I'm like, oh gosh, yep,
mm-hmm.
I can't even complain anymore. Like
Yeah,
we like have this like we categorize pain and like
mm-hmm.
what's worse or like
Mm-hmm.
what's and it's all
Yeah,
relative to what we've experienced or what we're experiencing currently. And I think we do ourselves a really big disfavor personally to invalidate ourselves. But also, I think we just need to be cautious too when having conversations with people that are struggling, whether we understand it or not. Yes, well, at least comments, yeah,
mm.
they got to stop.
They gotta stop. It's a
Like,
problem.
it's
I
terrible.
truly mean it makes me feel 10 times better whenever I'm talking to somebody about, this most recent doctor's appointment or whatever else, bad news, and someone says, that really sucks. I'm so sorry. Than saying, well, at least you can do this. Well, at least that. At least you have this. And I know people in the depths of their soul are trying to help. I know they're not trying to brush it off or be dismissive, but it's just something that makes it seem like you want to like throw a temper tantrum like a child and be like, no, it sucks. It's bad. Like, I
Yeah.
don't care about at least. I don't care that I can do this, but at least there's options, at least there's IVF, at least there's this. It's like that doesn't make me feel better. It still is horrible. It still sucks.
Yeah.
So for you, I'm sure it was the same. It's just, okay, well, I'm still hurting today. Yes, I'm pregnant and that's happy, but
Well, and
it's
I
still
think
hard.
people really struggle with how to handle loss and grief. And when I say
Mm-hmm.
those two words, I'm sure like literal death comes to mind, but I think that happens in all sorts of different ways. Whether it's loss and grief of a season of life or like freedom or career, but also in death, and whether that death be someone that we knew on Earth's side for a long time or as a baby.
Right.
And we just get on autopilot saying these things and we don't realize, yeah, some of the harm
Mm-hmm.
that's done. And I know when it comes to like death of like actual human, I'm really awkward with that because I haven't
Me too.
experienced that yet in
I
life.
have, and
But
I'm still very awkward about
I've
it.
like read enough and like know
Mm-hmm.
enough that it's just like, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. Like,
Yes.
do not sit there and say like,
Yeah.
well,
Honestly, that
yeah.
would work for me. That's funny.
Yeah.
But I think
So,
that in the sense of talking about grief too, there's a lot to be said for mourning circumstances that you thought you would get to have, mourning expectations, mourning versions of yourself that you never got to meet. So I'm sure that whether you realize it at the time of Luna's conception and birth, that you're mourning a version of yourself that will never exist. That
yeah.
youthful 20-year-old that got to do everything and, be carefree and relive that childhood. She never got to exist. And there's so
Honestly,
much,
it's probably a good thing.
but still, even if it's a good thing, I think it's very sad. And for
It
me,
is.
like,
Yeah.
of course I mourn the two pregnancies that we lost, but I also mourn, the version of myself that hopefully in some other universe got to have a happy, beautiful first experience. And it was how I kind of daydreamt it would be, the happy, everything is great. You get to tell your families there's no sadness, there's no bad nuance or memories. So I'm mourn that. And I'm mourn the hopeful version of myself that kind of still was disillusioned enough to think that it was easy and fun and pleasant and didn't have these negative connotations. And it sounds weird to say that you're mourning yourself when you're sitting here saying that you're mourning yourself, but even just the versions of yourself before you went through hardship, and your hardship started at a young age, so it's a little bit different, but I think that you see yourself change so much in difficult seasons. So to look back and think, I used to be so happy, or I used to be so much lighter. And not even to say happy, because happiness comes and goes. Happiness is an emotion. It's not like a state of being. But to look at yourself prior to a difficult circumstance and then just think, I had this vivaciousness, or I had this color in my life, that it's changed. It's a whole other level of something to mourn. So I don't know if you've also experienced that, but
Well, funny enough, the thing that comes to mind, speaking of Hawaii, where you're going in January.
yes.
So I went and stayed out for a summer in Maui, and I mean, it was the dream.
Oh, I can't
was
imagine.
like literally working at a fruit stand along Hana Highway, and we had there was like 20 of us and people from all over the world. We were all
Wow.
staying together, camping. Best summer of my life. And when I think, still guilty of it, when I think back to the most freeing time of my life, I think back to that summer in Hawaii. So 2 years ago, Sam went hunting, and I was like, well, if he's going to go do something, then I'm
Yeah.
going to go do something. So I went out to Maui, and I got the camper van because I had slept. I don't know how I was this version of myself. I'd slept in a tent for 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
I can't, you won't find me camping, like
No.
ever. So I got a camper van and like tried to recreate this. And it was like the most lonely.
Yeah.
I ended up spending like $700 on like resort hotel because I was like, I can't.
No.
I tried to go camp. I woke up
Yeah.
and my tent had become concave with rain.
Oh my god.
And I was like, absolutely not.
No.
So I paid for like a resort. And the moment I walked into like my
You're
two
like,
bed, I was like, this is
finally
where
I'm
I,
home. Yes.
yeah, it's like, I am not 19 anymore. I
No.
cannot live like that. But it's just funny because like I literally like physically tried to
Yeah.
recreate a point in life.
That's so valid,
and
though.
was just shown like, yeah, the place is still pretty, but like
You're not the same.
You're not the same.
Like the
And,
circumstance can be the exact same, but
Yeah.
you're not. And if you go there trying to find something that same like a nugget of happiness in a video game, you can just go and like get the coin and it recharges you. I feel like I do the same thing and think like, what was I doing whenever I was the happiest in my life? If I can point to like a really ecstatic stage, like where was I and what was I doing? What was I feeling? And then sometimes it's as dumb as like, well, I'll just read the same books and like do the same exercise
Yeah.
routine and like get the same coffee that I did, and it'll be the same. And it's not, because we're different than we were at that point. So you can go to the same spot with the same plan and the same preparation, but you're not going to feel the same because you don't fit that mold anymore.
Yeah. It's like in Pocahontas, about can't step in the same river twice or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's so true.
It is very true.
Always changing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, we got a little deep there, but I'm thankful that we were able to. Do you want to share anything that's helped you? I know it's a consistent and constant work in progress to get to where you want to be, and happiness is so fleeting. Like we said, it's an emotion. It's not a state of being. So you're not going to just be happy. But what's helped you overcome some of the dark days and work towards something that's a little bit happier?
Yeah. So again, like we talked about, I think there's going to be seasons of life where, and I wish I remember the name of the book that you asked me about. It's like wintering, and the whole concept of wintering is just these seasons that we go through where we're probably changing and evolving from that last season we were in, and they can be lonely, and they're not necessarily like these big bouts of depression, but that's, we're just like regrowing. And I think allowing yourself space to know like what you're feeling is fine. And allowing yourself to be sad or mad or scared and giving yourself that time. But then there's obviously a fine line as to like, okay, you gotta get back up.
Yeah.
I cannot encourage physical exercise enough. You don't have to be throwing around a barbell like me, but I swear it helps. Also, yeah, I just want to like throw on here for people to know we did the Impossible Mile together when I was pregnant and I didn't know it.
And that was tough.
And I had
anyways.
blisters.
I feel like I'm still getting blisters that come to the
hands.
surface. Yeah. We did it in the middle of the summer on black asphalt, and we were like, this will be so easy. And it was neither easy nor smart of us, because I was still having blisters resurface for months.
I'm pretty sure I took my test 2 days later.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Anyways.
Well, I wish you could have used it as excuses to like why we didn't perform well, but we did the whole thing and it was great. So
yeah. Oh, that was terrible.
Yeah, I will not be doing it again, but it's off the bucket list, which is good.
Yeah. And I think, one thing I've come to realize is that when you're struggling in life, I think it's easy to assume like all your friends and family are just going to drop everything and be there for you. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're really going through something, for someone to be there for you in the way that you need them to be, it is like the most selfless act someone will ever
Yes.
do.
Yes.
And I think it's just, again, it's so easy to get hung up on like, well, you didn't do this or say this or like whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
I think clearly defining what you need in a season of life. I know I didn't do that very well with Sam at the beginning. So we were both just kind of in survival mode. And he was like, is this going to last for like the next year?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You're like, I hope not.
yeah, I was like, yeah. So, and I think about, I was really angry at it. It felt like I had to fall off the face of the planet because I couldn't tell anyone that I was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And then because I fell off the face of the planet, none of my friends checked in on me.
Mm-hmm.
So I am going
Yep.
through this massive change in life. I've lost some of my unhealthier coping mechanisms. I have some healthy ones.
But
It's a
still,
big
coping
secret.
mechanisms are coping mechanisms. So
Yeah.
you lose them and it's difficult to
And
cope.
now I have no friends and I'm lonely.
Yeah.
So like it was, I think one for me, and I did finally reach a point where I may have lost friends in numbers, but I also over time saw the friends that would just pick up the phone and
Mm-hmm.
answer and give me so much more quality than the
Mm-hmm.
quantity I was obsessing
Right.
over. Um, but I also learned in that, like, because I'm a very prideful I've like always picked myself up by my own bootstraps. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, would never want to ask for help,
Of
but
course.
also just like, even if it's finding one or two people to just be honest and vulnerable with and saying that I'm struggling. Obviously I started therapy, so that helped. Um, yeah, I think just being honest with yourself and again, a couple of other people, and you'll learn pretty quickly which people are actually going
Yeah.
to take that and validate it, or,
Mm-hmm.
the
Listen,
family
yeah.
members that are like, well, I don't know, not very validating,
Yes.
but
Well, at least.
yeah. So, yeah, there's really not any like profound advice out there. And then I think just checking in on your friends that
Mm-hmm.
like either, obviously you probably don't know. I'm sure not like, well, it's not a podcast, but
Yeah.
most people don't know that
Yeah.
like when you're like trying or like dealing with
Yes.
infertility, but
Yeah.
gosh, if you have like a pregnant friend, like
Mm-hmm.
reach out
Yeah.
and then start that, because soon they'll be postpartum and
Mm-hmm.
they'll be dying to talk to another
Yeah.
adult.
Exactly.
Because I remember I'd have friends come over when Luna was born. I was like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Like I was
Like
like
I
the
have so
first
much to say.
time
Oh yeah.
that I had like talked to a human. And it's just such an isolating time, even when it's great and it's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful and baby's awesome and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. You're just straight up in
Mm-hmm.
survival mode
Yeah.
for,
Well, even with a friend of mine that is having a beautiful pregnancy and it's simultaneously with me going through this season. So I know that she struggled with a lot of guilt for having a beautiful, healthy pregnancy. So that's something that I would never want her to feel or wish on her. But I think that even like you said, when you have a beautiful time, like it's still difficult. And there's still, feelings of, am I allowed to be this happy when other people are struggling so bad? Am I allowed, like, it feels like boastful, or it feels like things are too good that you have to put a cap on your joy because not everyone has it. And that's not fair either. So I think, like you said, it so beautifully, just check in on your people and check in on your friends, because when people are struggling with something, they might not say it. And even if they do, they might get to a point where they feel guilty for repeating themselves so often. So you just have to check in on the ones that you love, regardless of what their variety of life circumstances, and just be there for each other, because
yeah,
it's difficult.
and just listen. And again, we've said it like 5 times. No if, then, or but statements. Just listen.
Yeah, exactly.
And let them talk and find someone that you can't. Again, I think back to that 15-week conversation, and I'm mortified at some of the thoughts and the things that I thought that I might do.
Mm.
But I think I needed to get out
Yeah.
the dark thoughts in
Yeah.
order to be able to move forward. So creating a safe place for people. And I get that's hard though, because then you, I guess, have to have at your own discretion what's
Yeah.
going to happen.
But
or
it's
what's
true. And I
not.
think,
But
like you
yeah,
said before, like some thoughts genuinely are from the devil. And I know every time I say that, I'm like, I sound like I'm a crazy, like fire
Yeah.
and brimstone preacher from the South. But there are some thoughts that are not from you. They're put into your head, and they're dark, and they're evil and awful, and keeping them inside just
And I think
continues
there's a
to
lot
poison
of
your thoughts.
I've seen like this on my reels, because
Mm-hmm.
no TikTok, but and it sounds a little crazy, and I haven't like read too much into it, but I've seen a lot of like conversations about spiritual warfare over
Yes.
like motherhood and
Yes.
pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess something to
There's
look
a
more
lot
into.
there's a
but
whole other episode to be
yeah,
unpacked about that. No, I've been getting into all that too, and again, I feel like I can see it from the outside perspective being like, what am I talking about? Like spiritual warfare and angels and demons. But then I'm like, it's real. I believe it. Like I believe that we're under attack. And there's so much I couldn't even hope to get into today. Not that I'm qualified to talk about it, but I think it's great that can recognize that and rebuke it and say, get thee behind me, Satan. We're not doing this today. I have that conversation a lot. Oh, well. Okay. We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your vulnerability and for sharing your story. And I encourage anyone who's going through a similar circumstance to share it with someone and just not keep it inside, because you're allowed to feel exactly how you're feeling and not need to justify or explain why you feel that way. But thank you for who you are as a person and just for being a wonderful individual and friend. And I admire you so much. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you next week. Bye.